This is Kam Snow, everybody. And I met Kam when I was first starting selftransformation.com, which most people who know me now have no idea what that is because they didn't meet me
Yeah.
from that. They met me through my Instagram and my TikTok, where I'm finally saying the quiet part out loud
Yeah,
about
very
the way I
loudly.
feel about Christianity and the way I
Yeah.
feel about the government, basically the way I feel about anything that I feel if it's going to make somebody's life better to know this, I'm going to say it. Because in my admitting it to myself and being authentic to what I was actually thinking and giving that some value for the first time of
Hmm.
forever, probably, that has set me free. And that's made me so much happier to be apart from the rigidity of you have to believe these correct things about Jesus in order for God to love you. And like being free of that
Hmm. Hmm.
has improved my life so much. But in so doing, I genuinely believe we are walking the path of Jesus. We are following Jesus. We are
Right.
being bold. And so I jumped at the opportunity to hear what you've been up to and dig in deep to the topic of deconstruction and kind of I was
Oh,
really reflecting
thanks.
this morning about how neither of us were really talking about it when we first met, but we were certainly talking around it.
Yeah. 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 And we're talking
Yeah.
about it a little bit to each other, but not
Yeah.
quite publicly.
I
Um,
remember like cautiously choosing my words because I knew you still identified as Christian. I knew that there was some synergy there, but I was still like picking out like I can't say the
yeah.
wrong thing because it could offend
Yeah.
Cam. He's a Christian. I don't think that way anymore. I'm like,
Yeah. I remember we had a
it's
whole conversation about that. And I was
mhm.
like, huh, interesting. Here we are. Yeah. What have I been up to? Um, well, in 2024, that's when we were doing our stuff. At the end of 2024, I started going into a bit of a nosedive in my life. Like everything just felt like it was kind of falling apart. But I didn't know what was going on, why I was feeling the way I was feeling. Um, Clients were wrapping up. I just didn't have the energy to do the marketing thing and the networking thing to go get new clients. And then at the end of that year, um, I'd kind of like already like boom, client leaves, client leaves, client leaves. I'm like, oh man, I'm like barely hanging on. And then like my anchor client with my biggest retainer wrapped up and left in December of that year. So it was like boom, my revenue dropped throughout that whole process like 60%. I was making about as barely more than I'd been making in politics when I first started. And at the end of that year, had a huge moment and confrontation with my parents about religion, because my just all of the things that were happening that they were doing in their church. Um, Turns out there was some abuse that was being covered up, and I confronted my dad about it, and that didn't really go anywhere, to be honest. But it began to form for me some semblance of what boundaries are and where mine were. Um, and then 2025 felt like the fog. Like I could not get a bearing on why I felt so exhausted all the time, why I felt so zapped, I described that period in my life as I'm in the gym, I'm doing deadlifts. And every time I put the bar down, somebody that I can't see is slipping more weight on without me knowing about it. And every time I do another rep, I'm like, why is this getting so much heavier progressively? Like nothing is getting easier, everything's getting harder. And at the time, my wife told me, you know what, I think you might be a narcissist. We'll get to more of that in a moment. And I was like, well, that's terrifying because everything I've heard about that, it doesn't sound good, right? This sounds like like you have cancer kind of thing. So I went and got a therapist, which I needed to do anyway. I went and got a therapist. I did a small group therapy program. Um, I started digging in some mental health resources, and I read this book that changed my life. And it's called I Don't Want to Talk About It: The Secret Legacy of Male Depression. And in it, he talks about how narcissistic traits show up within men who are not admitting or dealing with their depression. And definitely saw myself in a lot of that. Definitely saw my relationship with the men in my life in that. and got a lot of healing from that whole experience. Then came out on the other side of that feeling like I'd done a lot of work, had healed a lot of things, had really come into my own in a whole way. And yet this weight was still there. And it was like all the therapy that I'd done had helped me manage the weight, but the weight was still very much there. And I'll fast forward a little bit because not all of this is for public consumption, but the conversation you and I had in DMs about the relationship status I was in, that progressed very quickly from that into me essentially having the realization that I cannot be married to the person that I am married to anymore. So the conversation that we're having today is quite literally in the middle, actually more so the beginning of me getting out of a very toxic relationship that I've been in for 16 years. And I loved this person so much and gave it my all and came to the point where it was like, if I continue to go down this road that I'm on, I think I might die. I think I might like have a stress heart attack and die early. And I just don't want to do that. Sorry, I don't want to do that. So I made that decision a couple of weeks ago. And since then, like the weight, it's begun to lift, but I've also been able to see it for what it was, which is like, maybe I'm not the problem here. Like they say it takes two to tango in a marriage. And I've always said it takes two to make a relationship work, but it only takes one to tear it down. And here I am kind of like living that out. And so I feel like I'm starting over in a lot of ways. The last 2 years have drained me emotionally, they've drained me financially, they've drained me in every way that I could be drained. And now standing on the other side of it, I'm like, okay, like it really does feel like I'm starting over. I moved out to Nashville in 2021, been here for 5 years, and this city once held so much promise for me. And now I like drive around and I'm like, I can't even look at this. I can't even be here anymore. Like I need to go. So I'm going to get out of here as soon as I can. Um, with my kids and ex in tow because we're going to have to be living in the same city so we can both be close to the kids and whatever. Um, and just today began to in that process maybe a couple of months ago, started doing videos on TikTok again. And it was like, I like this. I kind of like talking about this. And that kind of like leads us nicely into the deconstruction thing because I deconstructed, I thought, about as much as I could. Like I thought that I like tore up the floorboards, and I did tear up the floorboards. And ultimately, what I found is that the foundation of my life underneath all of that wasn't actually built on my religious faith. It was enabled by my religious faith, but I built it on a need that I had to be needed, and I built it on my own desire and way of being to be codependent. When expressed in an unhealthy way, when it's expressed in a healthy way, I think it's very powerful the way that I can show up. But the way it has shown up turned into toxic codependency, and so I've been reconciling and wrestling with like how became an enabler of some really toxic, really damaging things that happened that I never thought I would do, like compromised some of my deep, deep core values for this relationship. Before I woke up and realized that I was losing myself because I was crossing lines that I never, ever thought I would cross.
I know the audience is dying for some specificity. Is it possible to share like one of those ways that you have
Yeah.
been compromising with us?
The biggest way that I compromised is that I entered into a polyamorous relationship while still married, at the
I did
behest
that
of my
too.
partner.
I just
Yay!
want to validate that, it happens to more people than would even be brave enough to talk about it. So the fact that you're
Yeah,
talking about it,
yeah,
you know, I talk about it. Sometimes it's not a well-known thing because it's like it feels like a
yeah.
lifetime ago, but when you're in it, like I certainly wasn't wanting to
Hmm.
talk about it. So
Yeah, and the wild, crazy thing is that entering into that poly relationship is actually what opened my eyes to what I was actually experiencing. And that that throuple relationship dissolved. But I now have a very healthy relationship that is like proper and platonic and what it should be right now while I'm like working on getting out of this thing. And but that the era I had like I made these decisions and huge decisions that I never thought I would compromise on. And but then when it was something that my then wife was okay with, um, I was willing to compromise me in order to keep the peace or to become what I thought she wanted or any of that. And so it really realized I was deconstructing my beliefs about God for so long when really I had her up in the position of God and had put myself into the position of the same theology that I'd heard from church, which is like, you are God and I am worm. Step on me and watch me squirm. Like I am nothing here. And like that goes just parallel with the crazy making that I experienced for so long of being like, am I crazy? Because I feel like I might be crazy because nobody else can see this. Can't tell you how many times we went to couples therapy, I think on 3 separate occasions. And each time the therapist was like, yeah, you guys seem like a really healthy couple. And I don't see any issues. In fact, you've graduated. You've graduated therapy. You don't really need to. We don't need to have any sessions anymore. And we did that 3 times before this poly relationship. In a lot of ways, saved me because this person was now in our relationship, watching everything that was going on and being like, "Hey, there's a sea of red flags here. there's no green flags. There's not even yellow flags. There are just red flags." I'm like, really? Are you sure? And it took months for me to start seeing the red flags. And what I've also realized, kind of tying this into the deconstruction religious conversation, it felt so normal because evangelical Christianity is centered around a narcissistic God. And it is centered around abuse. It's centered around gaslighting. It is centered around manipulation. And just last week, I've been going to a church that I absolutely loved, was so critical for my healing journey in deconstruction and unwinding a lot of the stuff that I picked up from religious stuff from my upbringing. And last week I was just there and I was like, man, this really hurts to say, but I don't think I can come here anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
because at the core of it, that they still believe that you are a worm, but for Jesus, and that he was a blood sacrifice for your forgiveness. Like at the core of it is a fear-based
it's still,
doctrine.
yeah, it's still the same system. And even though it was like the best, healthiest version of it that I'd seen, it was like, there's only so much you can do when you are operating inside of an institution that is inherently anti-women, that is inherently narcissistic, that is inherently destructive to the health of your, like, to your emotional health.
Yeah.
And I don't think that any of what has been constructed as evangelical Christianity has anything to do with the historical person of Jesus,
No,
like at all.
Jesus was deconstructing his religion at the time.
He
Like he
was.
was saying, you've heard it said that this God is a jealous God. Like you're believing in this Old Testament version of God, which is still happening.
Yeah.
But I tell you, the Father is like, the kingdom of heaven is like, and then all these parables, all these stories trying to illustrate that God
Yeah.
doesn't require blood in order to forgive
Yeah.
us, like that we don't have to believe that anymore. It's literally Plato's allegory of the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Is what
Enter
I
the
keep getting
Matrix.
from it. It's like
Yeah.
you and I, people are deconstructing. Jesus was deconstructing. He got out of the cave and tried to go back and tell people that
Yeah.
they were living in a false version of reality. and that they were being duped by the religion at the time,
Yeah.
and they just beat him up. They killed him.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. And it's like you go through these iterations of following in the way of Jesus and deconstructing, and then you're demonized for it.
Yeah,
And I had this moment just a couple of weeks ago where I grew up in a denomination called the Reformed Church of the United States.
I'm sorry
Um,
about that.
Heavily narcissistic. The church that I grew up in right now is hopefully going to collapse, but not for happy reasons because there's pedophiles run amok all over it. And I hope it collapses for that and that people can begin to heal. But I was raised on this document, not just the Bible, but a document called the Heidelberg Catechism. And it's something like this church, like they were big about how they split away from the Roman Catholic Church in the 1500s. And like they're the pure church and whatever, right?
It's
And
all kind of funny right now. Like,
it really is like the whole story, and it's about to get more ridiculous.
I
So I
can't
was
wait.
raised on this document, question and answer. You have like, here's the question, here's the answer, right? Literally telling you what to think. It's called catechizing. And every week I'd go to Sunday school and you had to recite memory from memory, right? Like the week's question. And then every summer you had to meet with one of the elders and recite a third of the book, which was like a big task when you're a teenager. It was like this big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be like so nervous about it, and you'd meet with the elders and get through it, and you're like, oh gosh, okay, I passed for this year, right? So I got curious a couple weeks ago. I was like, where did that come from? Like, what is that? Because it's not the Bible. Like, it's something else. Um, and I can understand why people are obsessed with the Bible the way they are, but like, where did this come from? And I learned two things. One, the Reformation happened in 1517. Martin Luther is like, yo, being Catholic, I don't like it. So he wrote 95 theses about why the Catholic Church sucks. Went to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, and nailed it on the door. And boom, the Protestant Reformation was born and the true church of Jesus Christ was proclaimed. Or so the story I was told was as it was given to me. I asked AI, I was like, what are some things that I don't know? And it's like, well, have you ever heard of the Peasants War of 1525? And I was like, no, say more. In which I learned that Martin Luther's theology, which had some good ideas that actually worked their way into some of our governmental structures later on in history, got to the peasants. And they started thinking like, hey, like if we're going to be free spiritually, then we should be free from the economic slavery that we're in. And we should do something about this whole feudal lord peasant situation. And Martin Luther was like, whoa, I didn't mean for that to happen. And he wrote this pamphlet that was widely distributed, basically saying, like, hey, sorry, I didn't mean for you to have freedom. This is for everybody else. And by the way, if you are a feudal lord and you're reading this, I'm pretty sure God is okay with you waging war on all these peasants who are causing all this ruckus, which led to a massacre where over 100,000 peasants were slaughtered because of his pamphlet. I was like,
There
wow.
went their workforce.
There went the workforce. There went the golden image of this perfect human who was like a patron saint. And I just kind of like pulling on this thread, like, okay, so what else happened that I didn't know about? And essentially, I landed on kind of coming back to this Heidelberg Catechism thing is the guy who wrote it essentially wrote it. Yes, he was a believer and he was devout and it was all real for him. And also, it was a political strategy because he was in a part of the world where there was the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church, and he was the Reformed Church, and that was not legally sanctioned. And so there was all these people around him who are looking at his territory, being like, "Ooh, you're not legally sanctioned. Like, what if we just came in and took it?" And so he wrote this as a way to establish his own religion to defend against the other. So I'm just sitting there. I'm like absorbing all this information, being like, so basically, you're telling me that I grew up reading a 16th century political tract as God's truth. That's the conclusion I'm coming to. I read political promotional materials, and that was given to me as what the creator of the universe wants from me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's
maybe
really what
we
the
can
Bible
just,
is too, if you think about it. I mean, if you think about
right.
like what Deuteronomy is, what Leviticus, these ancient documents, these personal mail from Paul to
Yeah.
Timothy, whoever the hell
Paul's
Timothy
personal
is.
mail.
Like
Yeah.
we're literally reading other people's mail. We're reading ancient legal documents for specific people in a specific time. Doesn't mean that just because it's in the Bible that it's real. And like I think Christianity has this mm, undertone of just like they believe in discernment, but the way that they discern is it in the Bible? Yes, then it's true. Or you just need to listen to what the Bible says about it, like
Yep.
homosexuality, for example, not realizing that
Yeah.
discernment extends to the Bible. And Jeremiah 8:8 talks about the lying pen of the scribes, and it's like he really genuinely believed that out of all the translations
Yeah.
and all the versions of this holy text, first of all, calling a book holy is
Hmm.
idolatry. Like you making that the authority in your life, how is that not
Yeah.
making a graven image of something on this earth plane? How is
Hmm.
kneeling
Hmm.
at the cross not making a graven image of like a torture device from earth? It is
Yeah.
literally right in front of us that
Yeah.
they're doing
Oh,
that with they're doing that with uh all kinds of political ideologies now, Zionism being a large one.
yes. Yes. So all of this is percolating for me about like the deconstruction and like maybe this is all just nonsense and like there's some wisdom in it. And what's interesting to me is that my deconstruction really started with one verse in the New Testament. I forget which one it is, but it's where Jesus tells the scribes and Pharisees, you search the scriptures because you think in them you have life, but you're completely missing that I'm the one who's talking about life. And I was like, ooh, so the Bible's not God. Got it. I can work from that. And I worked from that out of the religious conditioning. And I had an experience this week that really kind of sealed everything for me, where I'm very comfortable now saying, like, I'm not a Christian. Like, I think the person of Jesus is incredible, and I can be a follower of Jesus, but I'm not a Christian.
It's
And
exactly what I felt.
I took my kids to a new church this past week, and my thesis was one of their friends goes to this church, they can hang out in childcare at the very least. I go to this church, and it was not great. It was a church, and it was like a mega church and all the things. But the thing that got me is that my daughter comes out of Sunday school or their childcare thing, and she's got this cutesy little hat on. And on the hat, a little it's got a little heart and it says, God loves me. And it's got a little X and says, I am a sinner. And then it's got a cross that says, Jesus died for me. And then a little question mark that says, and now I get to make the choice to trust God forever. And I looked at the hat and I was horrified because then I was like, hey, honey, what did they say during church today? She's like, oh, they talked about the yucky. I was like, I don't exactly know what that is, and she didn't really know what that is either, but I think we can kind of put the pieces together. And then Shiloh, who's 3, was like, um, yeah, Jesus died for us on the cross.
Oh God.
And it's
That's
like, okay, so I'm not looking at this anymore as like love and redemption and grace and all these concepts that were forced on me as a kid. I'm looking at that now being like, we're teaching 3 and 4 year olds about the brutal murder of a man who died in a horrific way, and then telling these kids that he died because of them.
mhm.
Okay, how about we don't do that? And I'm just not going to do the church thing for a while, maybe ever, till I can figure out how to have these conversations in a healthy way. And we're going to go to a meditation circle next week. Let's just do that. Let's just not do the dogma thing because you and I both know how much work you have to put in to get rid of these ideas and unlearn them. And even after you've done so much work, it's still there. And
Mhm.
that's the legacy that I want to pass on to my kids is not having that
Yeah.
just corrupting their infrastructure,
The
as it were.
belief that you are a sinner and the belief that you have an evil heart that can't be trusted, that you're sinful, that you're worthless, that creates your entire life. And it creates the small handicapped version of you that I don't believe is glorifying to God at all. I think
Mm-hmm.
the fullest, most authentic and wholly expressed version of you is the holiest version of you.
Mm.
And it's the one in which God is most glorified. And I do believe Jesus was trying to tell people about a completely different God than the one they were following, which I feel like I'm following in his footsteps in a very
Mm-hmm.
similar way. I take there's some truth in the Bible. I certainly don't believe it's God's word. There have been people who've told me that the Bible is God, and that because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was
Yeah.
God. They don't realize that the word "word" in that Bible verse was not referring to the Bible at all.
Yeah.
It was
Not
referring
at
to the
all.
Logos, the
Yep.
Christ, the all in all, that's spoken of in the Gnostic Gospels and
Yeah.
other heretical texts, which if you read any of them, it's so obvious why they were left out, right? If we can include all these books and just say that they're God's word, even if it's just an ancient Hebrew legal document or, a letter from Paul, and we're just saying, oh, God wrote all these. Like, it's easier for people to believe. It is a wide gate. It is a broad road that I do believe leads to destruction because you live inside this tiny pinhole of like, this is reality, this is the truth,
Mm-hmm.
and if you believe anything outside of this pinhole, then you're going to go to a place called hell. Like, I don't want to live my
Yeah.
life in that small of a location. I need to expand, and I believe that's what Jesus was doing.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And like that whole paradigm of religious belief, which can be so comforting, especially when you're in it, right? It brings you a certainty that is artificial. It's not actually like life is inherently uncertain. And once you start to get some distance from what you grew up in and you start to give yourself the freedom to just ask questions, you start to see how rigid the thinking is. And there's one principle that has served me really well in guiding my journey. And it doesn't come from the Bible, but it's mentioned in the Bible, which is like you shall know them by their fruits. And so I decided a long time ago, once I started really deconstructing and getting into my theology and just sifting through what do I want to keep and what was harmful, is that the only way for me to know if something was right or not was by the ways that it made people feel, and by the actions that it produced, and by the results that it got. And I began to see how the things that I was told, this is God's truth and this is what's real and all of that, were producing some really, really negative outcomes. I had a moment 5 years ago or so ago when I realized that almost everybody in my peer group that I grew up within at this church was in some kind of 12-step recovery. Sex
Mm.
addiction, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, all the different kinds of addictive behaviors. And I'm like, I don't think that is coincidence. I think that we probably all share some of the trauma in common here. Um, and one of my friends that I grew up with, like, actually, she was the pastor's daughter and was like the first like girlfriend type of person I wasn't allowed to date, but the closest one that I like really loved. She passed away in 2021 from liver failure, largely because of alcoholism. And it was like these things that would just happen. And I remember going to the funeral and it was just glossed over, just like not even mentioned. And like I get it, it's a difficult thing when that happens, but there was no honesty from anybody. It's the only funeral I've ever been to where nobody was crying, not because people didn't want to, but because there felt like this oppressive, like you're not supposed to cry here kind of thing. And I can't tell you how damaging that was growing up in an environment where my denomination specifically, our nickname was the Frozen Chosen, because there was like emotional expression was so looked down upon. And there are certain sects of Christianity where it's like it's all you do is emotionally express, and so we are the total opposite. And unveiling those layers, I'm now 34, feeling like in some ways I'm really starting to discover for myself what ways of expression I really want to live into. And a lot of that's
Mm.
what we talked about at the beginning, but it's like a lot of it is just you don't actually have the freedom to express yourself in these ways, even though as a human you have that ability and that autonomy and that agency, but you're convinced through psychological conditioning that you don't have that choice. And when you believe that you don't have the choice, then you might as well not actually have the choice, because you will condition yourself into anything that makes you feel safe. And so there's this quote from some Revolutionary War founder of like, if you trade freedom for security, you deserve neither. And
Mhm.
that, in many ways, is what the evangelical American church in America has done. They've taken something that there's a grain of truth in it, like a little grain, and turned it into a machine that in the last 10 years we've seen go from like kind of being in the background to full center stage. And it's like, oh wow, this thing is actually like full on corrupt to the core, downright evil, and
Mhm.
should be stopped. Like,
It's just so normalized. If you really think about it, like evangelical Christianity, the core tenets of belief that Jesus died for our sins, the payment to a God who needs blood in order to forgive us. And
right.
there's so many people who believe that it's become so normalized that you don't step back from the painting. You're seeing
Yeah.
like the forest for the trees. Like you're stuck in front of one tree and you're like, this is the forest. And then you take one giant step back, like I've done, like you've done, and you start seeing, and there's no limit to the amount that you can step back and see even more layers of the same thing. I mean, you see it playing out in similar ways that people believe a certain thing about themselves and they turn to alcohol to deal with the pain of living in that way, not realizing that if
Mm-hmm.
they could be in a true safe space to be able to be their authentic selves and not worry about being ostracized, because we have this need as humans to belong. We want to be part of something. That's part of safety, is emotional safety. So if we're
Yeah.
not even, we're told that that part of us doesn't exist or shouldn't be allowed to be shown, and we
Yeah.
try to stuff ourselves into what other people, what we believe other people want us to be instead of who we actually are. And I do
Yeah.
consider myself one of the lucky ones, despite the damage I can see was caused of, I did whatever the fuck I wanted to do, regardless of what my friends were doing. I felt
Mm-hmm.
guilty about it the whole time, traveling
Mm-hmm.
in Europe all summer and all semester. I studied abroad instead of going on a mission trip, paying
Mm.
for it myself instead of asking other people for money, which like I
Yeah.
felt guilty not giving them money because they knew I had worked, they knew I had saved, they knew I was being able to pay for my trip abroad mostly by myself, and so they knew I had money, and I would hear from them I feel so guilty for not wanting to go into mission work, not realizing that I was in training to do the mission work I'm doing now by doing what I actually wanted to do, because I can see what would have happened if I had forced myself to go to Bible college, if I had forced myself to go into the mission field and to uh, push past the discomfort of asking other people for money for my trip to Paris to evangelize.
Yeah.
There's many
Yeah.
of these crazy trips, and I see how much worse it could have been. And that helps in having more compassion on that version of myself who did not know any better, who was in sin, which I believe is ignorance. But
Right.
now that I know better, it's obvious to me why I can easily do better, because I know better now. I know that living in that way, codependency, forcing myself to be somebody I'm not to make other people comfortable or happy or maybe less
Yeah.
afraid, like
Yeah.
we're living our lives to make sure that these other people are comfortable with us. Like that's not our responsibility. How somebody reacts to you, how somebody who maybe insults you online, like they're giving you a snapshot into what they're thinking at that moment. They're just saying their quiet part out loud instead of hiding it. They're fearlessly telling you what they think, and
Yeah.
showing you what level of consciousness and what level, what frequency they're resonating with. And you
Yeah.
might not recognize that, but that doesn't say anything about you. It says everything about them and how they're choosing to express themselves at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more I see Christians do that in response to the things I'm saying out loud, my quiet part out loud, I'm finally putting language to. It's helping a lot of people, even the
Yeah.
ones who are really made uncomfortable by it, because they get to reckon with questions and at least hear the questions. They might not
Mm-hmm.
understand the questions, right? Because they might
Yeah.
not have the ears to hear that question,
Yeah.
might not make sense to them. They think I'm the enemy. They can't understand what I'm saying because they're literally resonating in a frequency that says, I'm the enemy. Attack, attack.
Yeah.
She's saying something
Yeah.
I don't agree with. She's bad. She's heretical. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I don't make my content
Like
for those
white blood
people.
cells surrounding an infection to
Hmm.
protect the host, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you never know when one of those questions, those moments, even if it's a TikTok video or a conversation, is gonna lodge in someone's brain and not and just sit there for years. I remember there was this one guy. Um, I used to go swing dancing a lot when I was a teenager, and I was super sheltered and didn't really have any friends that didn't go to my private Christian school or my church. And there was this guy who ran the swing dancing thing that I went to. And I remember we were just standing there. I volunteered so I get free admission. And he said something about like, man, I feel bad for you, dude, being all religious. Like, I don't have any of these problems. I'm not sexually suppressed or sexually repressed, something like that. And I remember one being like super judgmental of him, being like, "Oh, well, you're not very pure." And two, just like being like I was offended by it, which is good because I remember it. Because now I look back at that, I'm like, I see where he was coming from. I understand what he was saying now of how religion seeps into every single area of your life and controls all of your decision making, and you think you're making a free choice when you're not. Like the decision that I made to get married when I was 21 and she was 19, both of us from very high control religious backgrounds, we weren't making a free choice. Not really. We didn't really know who we were. We were following the template that was laid out for us and doing something that we thought was right, but the choice was within a narrow confine. It was There was no option to be like, you know what, maybe we should just live together for a little while, and maybe we should have a sexual relationship before we get married, just to explore that together and see if we do want to make a lifelong commitment to each other before we do that. And that's never on the table with evangelical Christianity. And I'm not advocating for promiscuity or anything like that. I remember reading a book about being a strong father to strong daughters called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. And she lays out a ton of research around like sexuality and all the things. And I was like, okay, so there's something here. This is something you have to be careful of. And also the way that it's presented in Christianity, the way that's presented in religion is not about wisdom at all. It's not
Yeah.
about discernment. It's not about all the overarching experience that I've had over and over and over and over and over again within Christianity has been, here's the thing that we say, and it's a good thing. And here's the thing we do, and it's the exact opposite. And here's the Bible story, and here's how we're interpreting it, and here's what the Bible story is actually saying. And so you don't even know if you disagree with the Bible story because you're presented a version of it that's not even real. Like the church that I went to that I'm kind of moving on from now, part of why it was so impactful is because it was so good at helping me untangle, hey, here's the Bible story. Here's what the Bible story is actually saying, and here's all the actual context. So you can actually decide if you agree with the Bible story or not. And I came away from that experience being like, everything's the opposite of what I was told. Like
Hmm.
almost everything is the opposite in how it's interpreted and then how it's practiced, because I certainly never saw love and grace and compassion and discernment being practiced. I heard it being talked about, and that's all it ever was.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense that you'd be able to see it for what it was in hearing about it from other people and people's experience of it too. Um, the different Bible verses that people will always bring up to defend why Christianity is true, they don't have any impact on me because I don't believe that the Bible is all the truth. I think that there's a lot of
Right.
truth in the Bible. I think
Yeah.
Christianity itself as a religion is a complete lie built around
Mm-hmm.
a truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was.
Yeah.
whether purposely created to obfuscate the message and what Christ was actually doing, teaching us about the nature of us, reality being all one. And if you judge yourself, or sorry, if you're judging somebody else, not only are you judging yourself, you literally are judging yourself, because the only reason that you dislike something in another person is
Hmm.
because you've got that element in yourself. Like, you
Totally.
recognize that as something that you don't like and that you don't do, so you've judged it in yourself. And that person has maybe a totally different experience of life than you, and you're trying to force you're like telling them your opinion and trying to tell them that you're right and they need to do things or believe things the way you do, because if not, you're going to go to hell. There's no way I can get on board with that being reality. I just don't believe Christianity is rooted in any type of natural logic the way the rest of creation is. Nobody is born naturally believing that they're a piece of shit that
Right.
needs a blood
Right.
sacrifice to wash
Nope.
them white and to be acceptable to the Creator. It's like this whole
Hmm.
concept of Jesus died to save us from himself. Like, he if the Christian doctrine is true and Jesus is God and he was paying the price for our sin and God is accepting the payment, it was a really convoluted, effed up way to make
Yeah.
something happen when
Yeah.
and
Right.
that the logic just isn't there, because then you remember the parable of the prodigal son, my all-time favorite parable. To
Yep.
me, it's very obvious that Jesus was trying to explain that God is actually like this, not like the way
Yeah.
they've been telling us that
Yeah.
he is. And so I'm trying to be
Yeah.
like, y'all,
Exactly.
this isn't
Yeah.
about Christians. This isn't about, I mean, it kind of is, because at the end, like, the other brother who stayed on the farm with his father and was like the religious, like, zealot or whatever, was angry
Hmm. Hmm.
that the wayward prodigal son had come home and,
Yeah.
like, had no consequences really, but like the consequences were lived out as he was choosing
Yeah.
that wayward life,
Yeah.
and you're punished by your sin, not for your sin, like the
Mm.
ignorance that you live in and you do things that harm you. I mean, really, sin is out of ignorance. We're harming others, but we're also harming
Yeah.
ourselves in harming others because we don't realize that
Yes.
oneness. So that's the separateness that we live in. That's the sin
Hmm.
that we live in.
Hmm.
It's totally based in ignorance. Fear is based in ignorance. Like, the
Hmm.
only actual reality is love. It's the only thing I'm certain of is not BS. And so I see the Bible as this desperate attempt to try to explain it with the language that they had at the time and understanding
Right.
and the level of consciousness, the frequency they
Yeah.
were vibrating at,
Yeah.
because they were also in this world similar to where we're at today, just in a completely different
Hmm.
context of there's people that are controlling what you're thinking, and they're trying to tell you that this is reality so you won't see the forest for the trees. They're telling you that this one tree, you're a mouse that lives in this tree, and this is Earth, and
Yeah.
this is reality, and this is who we are, and this is who you are, and this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do, and like programming who you believe you are. Because if they don't, then you're gonna figure it out like Jesus did.
Oops. That would be
Oops,
good.
that
Yeah.
wouldn't be good.
Yeah. One of you touched on something that, early in my journey that was really helpful in my deconstruction was learning about this doctrine called the accommodation of God. And the accommodation of God essentially says that, like, yeah, you could like read the Old Testament. There's some really horrible stuff in the Old Testament, and you cannot explain it away. Like, you can't. Like, God literally like incites and orders his people to commit genocide. You can't explain that away. And so it's like, if you're going to accept that God is doing this, then you have to come away with some explanation for it. And one, I started from that standpoint of like, well, this is all true and God is like actually telling these people to do this. So what's the reason behind it? You have to come to the accommodation of like God trying to communicate to that group of people at that time in ways that they could understand. And then when you strip away the filter of the Bible being this perfect, infallible book that makes no mistakes, then you actually get free of that entirely, and you can see like this the accommodation of God, even working in and around the Bible, of this divine force of love trying to reach people in a way that they could actually understand for where they're at. And I remember listening to this podcast, um, and it was about like there was some war, some horrible thing. It was probably in the Book of Judges where like they were, told to do. genocide this people or whatever. And the guy who was doing the podcast was like, okay, so this is horrible because Joshua, I think it was Joshua, had his people um, string up their enemies on like stakes, right, for like a day. And he's like, that's horrible. And it sounds horrible. But the thing is, if you look at that in the context of what everybody else did, it was actually a gesture of mercy. And that's how they might have understood it. And you're like, wow, how is that even possible? And when you kind of like look at some of those, it doesn't justify or make any of it right, but it kind of helps you understand why it exists there. Where it's like you're contrasting this with a people group who would, cut their enemies open and have their innards eaten by the birds, and they'd stay out there for months, right? Or like for weeks. And like this people would put them up on a stake, but then they'd bury them. And it's like, okay, it's interesting. Like it's still barbaric, it's still cruel, but there's some quality deep underneath it that you're like, I see where you're getting. I see how you're kind of getting there in that context, which we already can't even begin to understand because we weren't there. And so beginning to see how like that was a part of the pathway, one of the steps on the way out was letting go of needing to make everything right, needing to justify everything, because you can only ever tie yourself in knots when you tie yourself to that position because it cannot be justified. It cannot be explained away. You either say, no, that's not actually what God is like, or you twist yourself in knots and be like, well, it was an act of mercy for God to eliminate this entire people group, including the women and the children. And in which case you've made some serious compromises on everything else you believe, and you're just stuck. And most people just live with that contradiction and ignore it.
Yeah. And it can't possibly be that those are just what people thought God was like back then. The reason why people sacrifice animals to supposedly God is in the Old Testament is the exact reason why Jesus was turned into the ultimate sacrifice, because at the end of that transaction, there's still a God who required blood to absolve humanity of their sin and reconcile them to himself. Like it is such
Yep.
the same convoluted shit, and it's the same mental energy. It's the same frequency or consciousness of those tribes that would sacrifice little girls to volcanoes at the time. And then there's like in Peru, I went to a museum and there's this little girl who is still frozen after being sacrificed at the top of a mountain. They would hit him over the head, give him drugs. It was a whole ceremony. They were raised to become sacrifices in some of these cultures. But
Damn.
long story short, it's like for me, realizing that the same mentality that happened is at the heart of Christianity, and this belief that there's a God who is satisfied, the justice is satisfied by blood and death. And like your wrongdoing, you living in sin is so bad that somebody needs to die, whether it's Jesus, whether it's 14 goats over a period of your life, whatever,
Yeah.
like probably
Yeah.
more than that, that something needs to die. Like that makes no sense from the consciousness that I feel like I've fought my way to be able to vibrate at.
Yeah.
Understanding what love is completely backwards from what I was taught. When you're
Yeah.
taught that love is somebody dying on the cross for you, that's a complete inversion of what love actually is, which is the forgiveness that I think
Yes.
Jesus was actually trying to talk about. He was trying
Yeah.
to get people to deconstruct from this stupid sacrifice bullshit.
Yeah. And he did it through love. And that's the thing that gets missed entirely. Is that we built a temple to the idea of love in the form of Christianity and yet practice none of it. And when you experience, which I know you have, and I have now as well, when you experience what it is like to be actually unconditionally loved by somebody, it changes your entire reality. It rewires your whole nervous system. It completely changes everything about how you experience the world. And that was something for me. I always had this deep, deep, deep feeling that the love that I was getting from those around me was conditional. And it was reinforced, and it was literally taught that God's love for you, it is said to be unconditional, but it's conditional. if you don't accept Jesus as your savior, well, then God doesn't actually love you and he's going to send you to hell. But we're going to call it love. We're going to call it love. And that forms how people live. And so I grew up in an environment where, at some core level, I was always afraid that that might be true. And I discovered it for myself. I think I told you this in our DMs about when I told my parents about the poly relationship that I was in, and the reaction that I got was initially very much like, all right, well, we're done with you. Now they came around a little bit and we've had some conversations since then, which is growth, I believe, on their part, which is awesome, and growth on my part. But it was that moment of like, wow, this really is conditional. And you look at how it's portrayed just in general, because there's, if you're raised in a Christian household and that's the story that you're told from up top, there's always going to be a question in your mind of, well, what if someday I decide not to be a Christian? Or what if someday, even worse, I discover that I'm gay, or that I'm some other kind of sexual orientation that isn't straight and narrow? What if I decide that, I'm going to get an abortion? What if I decide any of these kind of like social contagions that you're taught about are so evil and wrong that completely gloss over the human in the situation, and just look at that human and like make judgments? And I've experienced this a lot with my partner, who I'm in a relationship with, that we've kind of referenced a little bit, who has a lot of tattoos and a lot of piercings. And I'll see the looks that they get of just the judgment. And I just know what's going through my mind when their mind, when I'm like, especially like at a religious experience. Like we went to this church and you put your flashers on if you're a first time guest, right? And there's parking attendant. And so we pull up to the first parking attendant, roll down the window, and the parking attendant saw my partner. And I swear, I swear I could hear his mind. I'm imagining this, I'm making it all up, but I swear that I could hear him be like, oh my goodness, these are exactly the kind of people who should be at church, and they're here. Oh my goodness. He was so excited. And it was just like, oh, okay, thanks, David. But like, that's the persona. It's like you're
Mhm.
this worldling person who's lost, and now you're coming in to be saved, and then you walk into the building and you're like, well, this is a cult. I can't do this. I left early because I felt like I couldn't breathe inside the building.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it all comes back to that thing in the background of there's something about this that just don't feel right.
Mm.
And for the longest time, I thought it was me. I thought I just wasn't
Mm-hmm.
getting it. Like the reason I don't want to go into ministry is because I'm not that good of a Christian,
Yep.
or like
That's the
it's my
gaslighting.
faith. I'm not praying enough. And then when I
Mm-hmm.
did experience, I got married young too, and I got divorced after 8 years. I got in that marriage because I thought I was supposed to. All my friends were getting married. I was taught
Yep.
that being a wife and a mother was like the highest ideal as a Christian woman. I felt like I was late when I had just turned 24 and I still didn't know who I was. Like I just gotten back from a summer in Australia and I was
Yeah.
about to finish college, and then suddenly I was like, ooh, there's an opportunity in front of me. This guy really likes me and my parents like him. And it was all people pleasing. In retrospect,
Yeah.
I didn't have the
Yeah.
language or the experience to know that that's what
Yeah.
I was doing, but I was self-abandoning. I was like, I told this man I'd never leave him, so I guess I can't leave him, right? Like I told him that I wouldn't, and I put it in my
Dude.
wedding vows, and like God hates
Yeah.
divorce, and what will
Yeah.
everybody think? And
Yeah.
so I said yes when he brought polyamory to me, because I thought, well, at least I don't have to be everything for him anymore. It's not my job to make him happy. It's not my job to make him look good in front of his
Yeah.
parents, which I did. I did it all too well
Yeah.
because
Which I
he
did.
actually like had some people believing that when I was having my spiritual awakening, which manifested as a crisis, like almost like a
Right.
psychosis thing.
Yeah.
I was overusing marijuana at the time. I've since learned to like actually know what I'm putting in my body,
Yeah.
but it kind of caused this explosion of emotion that I no longer felt I needed to hold back. And people weren't
Mm.
used to seeing that side of me. They were used to
Yeah.
seeing the people pleasing side of me. So they thought that
Yeah.
I was going nuts. And I was like, no, you guys don't understand. I no longer have to make this man happy. My life can finally begin. I had that kind of feeling of like,
Yeah.
I'm no longer living inside the whole of a piece of Swiss cheese and calling it reality. You know, like I am living so much larger from an emotional standpoint because really that's how we perceive our lives is from an emotional how I'm feeling point of view. And so if we're looking out at our lives and we don't like our lives, we might start to blame ourselves on a subconscious level of like I did this to myself, like I hate my life, but I also hate myself because this is what I'm accepting. And I think I was in that space. I didn't recognize the depression. It did get worse than that, though, when I believed the gaslighting. And you said the word gaslighting, Cam. That is
Yeah.
so real.
Yeah.
Like, you believe when you're trying to tell people what you're feeling and trying to explain to the psychiatrist that you were married and didn't want to be married, now you're not married, or you're going to get a divorce and you're happy about it. You can like try to get them desperately to believe you by saying, "Oh, well, I'm a published author. I just live down the street." Like dropping your zip code because it's a good zip code, and they'll take you
Mm-hmm.
seriously. Because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize they weren't not taking me seriously. I didn't realize it would be a possibility
Yeah.
that they wouldn't understand what I was saying and just say, "Oh, well, she says all these things that are probably not true because look at her. Like who could be that accomplished by such a young age?" I was 31 at the time.
Yeah.
She's having delusions.
Yeah.
She's got in psychosis or whatever, when everything that was coming out of me was coming out in a way that I had never communicated before, completely unobstructed by making sure I didn't piss somebody off or keeping somebody comfortable. I wasn't editing the words that I was saying anymore. I wasn't proofreading the words I was saying anymore, and I had been doing that. And it was draining me. It is exhausting pretending to
Mm-hmm.
be somebody that you're not, especially when you don't even realize that's what you're doing. Everything just feels so
Yeah.
hard because you're not living life to who you're being somebody you're not, and
Yeah.
you're lying to yourself, but you don't know it. Like you don't know
Yeah.
when you're lying to yourself
Yeah.
sometimes, and I didn't
Yeah.
know until I knew, and then it changed everything.
Yeah. And honestly, like what you just said of like it's so much harder when you're living life when you're not yourself. And like for the listeners here, I would hear people talk about that and be like, yeah, but what does that mean? Like what I've discovered it means is that you pretend to engage in interests that you don't actually find interesting. You pretend to engage in hobbies that you don't actually care about. You pretend to like the people, places, and things that whoever you're trying to please likes because they like it, not because it's actually does anything for you. And when you've lived in that for long enough, you may not actually know what it feels like to find an interest in something
Yeah.
until something, or in my case, someone, comes along and there's an interest there that wasn't something that you tried to make happen. It just happened. And you experience it and you're like, oh, this is probably available in other areas of my life. I just didn't know what to look for. And you can start to see how those threads can start to open up. Like I picked up my guitar for the first time in years the other night and just started playing and processing out loud through music what I was experiencing and feeling. And is the most spiritual experience that I've had in years of feeling connected to God and divine love and just flow and like, whoa. And then
You
there's
came
the
home to
grief.
yourself. Like
Came
I'm
home.
hearing you came home to yourself, and
Yes.
you
Yes.
felt seen, and you were present with yourself, and you just let it be instead of having your mind elsewhere because you're supposed to be doing this or you're supposed to be doing that and fulfilling all these
Yeah.
obligations
Yeah.
while completely ignoring yourself. And you stop doing
Yes.
that.
And right. Because when you do that long enough, as I have for a very long time, because you think that that's what love requires of you. And that's another piece of the religious stuff is like you get all this conditioning. And I got it to a lesser extent as a man than the women in Christianity get it. But I still got that you should put your own needs aside, that you should be the caregiver, that you should take care of the people around you, and that it is noble and honorable to put yourself aside in the interest of someone else. And it is to a certain extent, except when putting yourself aside becomes the default, so much so that you're not even putting yourself aside anymore. You're just aside all the time. And you don't even realize that that's happening. And when you grow up in that, especially as a woman, growing up in that conditioning, you find it difficult to articulate what you actually want. And in that book that I read last year, from Terry Real, my favorite psychologist right now, the I Don't Want to Talk About It book, he said, in our culture, society does violence to women, to girls' voices, and it does violence to boys' hearts. In other words, in general, and I've seen this to be true in my own coaching practice, women really struggle with speaking uncensored, letting their true thoughts and feelings be known, and using their voice. And men really struggle with feeling their feelings and understanding their emotions. And it's because we have a cultural and religious system in place that seeks to suppress the voice of a powerful woman, even though women are meant to be the guiding lights of civilization, and the entire planet should be a matriarchy, because then we would have no wars. And it also suppresses the feelings that men have because that's too feminine. And it is all engineered. And ultimately, this was the problem I had with Christianity that I could never get away from, that never got resolved, that no church or theology could ever erase, was the fact that fundamentally Christianity erases women. It erases the feminine. There's a Godhead with three male counterparts.
Nobody will
And
admit that there's feminine in any of the Trinity. They're like, oh, the Holy Spirit is Jesus, is God, and
yeah.
the Father. He's not feminine. Like Mother Mary, she was a human.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever.
Yeah. And that's the closest that Christianity gets to, is if you're Catholic, then you revere the Virgin Mary. But if you're Protestant, there's not even that. There's no feminine presence at all in Christianity. And most of us grew up in churches where women were not on stages. And even if they are on stages, they're still on stage inside of an institution that fundamentally devalues them. So they're kind of, it's an internalized misogyny that many women don't know that they have. And
Yeah.
I think that part of my mission here on earth, especially with the events of the recent past, is to help, to be a support for women who are looking and are hungry for that freedom from the religious institution, from the conditioning, who are yearning to really use their voice, whether or not they know that. And that's the context in which we met, is like doing
Yeah.
that work to uncensor and unfilter and be like, yeah, let it fly, Caitlin.
Mm.
Say all the things you need to say.
Yeah,
And here we are.
and you touched on something about having the language to be able to articulate it. That is so
Mm-hmm.
important, and I see that as part of my mission, is taking the things that I was thinking and feeling back then, putting language to it, what was actually happening in that moment, and being brave enough to say it out loud so other people can hear it and be like, "You make sense of what I've been thinking for years." I
Mm.
finally have the language. Somebody said it to me today, like, "I love your videos because you articulate what I've been thinking for, I don't know, a long time or whatever, a couple of years, and their deconstruction was easier because of it." I didn't even know what deconstruction was. And it really has
Yeah.
has a lot to do with religion, but like you have to deconstruct a lot of things. And for many people, religion is just the first domino, and then it becomes like, holy shit, what else have I been believing that's not true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because for me, um, religion was actually the second domino. The
Hmm.
first domino was politics, because I was raised in a very political church, and very specifically my dad worked in politics, and I did, and then I was politically active in all the ways you can be throughout high school. And then I went into, and I started my career at 17 working in the political industry doing all kinds of things, and I was there for 6 years. So when I left the industry and came into internet marketing and coaching and started having the freedom, because for the first time professionally, my paycheck wasn't tied to what I said I believed. I was able to look back and be like, and I remember the first one for me was immigration. I remember looking at that issue and just being like, you know, I think there's a lot of racism in the things that I was believing and being told. And now we're seeing that in full display of how much that can be alive. But they're so interconnected, especially if you grew up in America. Religion and politics are like the same. It's like America's favorite sport is political religion and religious politics. Like it is our brand that we
And
have
can you
concocted.
deconstruct one without deconstructing the other? Because you're right. There are plenty of people who think religion and politics are the same thing. Like you have to believe this. Like all the Christians that support Israel despite the genocide because of what it says in
Mm-hmm.
Revelations. Like what? You have to use your discernment on that book too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
understand where the Bible came from, understand the way things have evolved and understanding that what you're being told may not be the truth on purpose. You didn't just get lucky and find, the secret truth that only a few find. Like that's not what's meant by the narrow road. Like when I hear Christians say we want heaven to be crowded and like they're not understanding that finding Jesus and saying that he died for my sins, he's the answer. Like Jesus is the answer for everything. Jesus maybe had an answer for everything if he was standing in front of you and you wanted to ask him, like we all ask AI and Google now, like what
Mm-hmm.
the answer is, he would have an answer. But Jesus himself, his body and his blood being an answer for a problem that you didn't know you had until somebody told you that you were a sinner and explained this whole story to you that you never
Yeah.
would have come across otherwise
Yeah.
is not true. And helping people see that and to see how those exact same mechanisms are being used in other parts of the matrix, so to speak, is just another layer. Like psychiatry, when I went through the mental hell that I went through,
Mm-hmm.
deconstructing and not knowing that I was deconstructing, being told that I was irreparably mentally ill, given prescription after prescription,
Yeah.
diagnosis after diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
It was a mental hell because nobody really made the connection between how I was experiencing reality and why I was seemingly falling apart and what I was raised to believe was the truth or else, right? There was that element of fear there of like,
Yes.
there
Always.
was no option to get divorced. There was no option to just decide not to be a Christian anymore. All of a sudden, I just wasn't anymore. And I realized that maybe I never had been because there was some part of
Mm-hmm.
me that could never get on board with this just doesn't feel good. And I would think that the shame was the same as guilt. Like I believed that there was always some, and I think I'm really starting to recognize this even more. Like the work never ends. It just the next level is you're starting on the next level of healing that part of yourself, but believing that that you're bad and so sabotaging yourself because of it. Like somebody like me would never, make a film and, you know, actually let people see it.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
not who I am, but that
Dude.
is exactly who I am. I'm making a film and I
Yeah.
want as many people as possible to see it. That if I hadn't left Christianity, if I hadn't even deconstructed out of like parents know everything land too, like I definitely believe that my parents had all the answers and the best
Yeah.
wisdom ever. And I got married because both my parents liked my ex-husband, and of course, God can use all things for good. We have the power to alchemize everything that happens to us to be something that helps us grow and shift and
Mm.
expand. And that's, I think, a heavenly way of living, knowing that no matter what, it's all happening for us and it can all be used for the good because this life isn't all we have. We're
Yeah.
here to grow into the truest versions of ourselves, and we need each other to do that. We need to listen to each other, and yeah, there's a lot more to it. And I feel like there's a giant iceberg that comes after you deconstruct like that first domino, whatever it is, right? And for some people, like you were saying, it is the same thing. There's no difference between
Yeah.
politics and religion for a lot of people, but like all it takes is one thread, one thought different than what you were told. Like maybe, wait, what if that's actually true? That what they're telling us isn't the truth. What would that mean? And
Yeah.
what actually is true, and who's in charge of disseminating the information and telling us it's true? And in my awakening, one major theme that came forward was the telephone game of like there's this fraud Jesus that he's a lot of people believe in an imposter Jesus is like part of a download that I got one night. It was like a kind of a wild, some would say psychotic experience of like, oh my gosh, receiving knowledge I didn't know before and it made total sense, but I was stone cold sober. Like there's no drugs influencing me whatsoever. And I just had this shift in perception of Jesus of like there's a false Jesus and then there's the true Jesus. And then after
Mm-hmm.
that, I think I read the Gospels, and it became so obvious to me that he was taken out for. It literally says in the Bible they were plotting against him. The religious leaders were plotting against him. Like he was a danger to religion, and now there's a religion about him
Yeah.
that people like you and I are
Yeah.
talking louder. We are a danger to, and so there is probably going to be security at my live film premiere. Because I want to be, I love my life and I love, what I'm doing with it finally, and I want to protect myself. But it's crazy that you even have that thought because look what they did to Jesus. Look what they
Yeah.
did to Jesus. What would they do to me? Is like that
Mm-hmm.
history. What would they do to you? Like if I did like a conference, I'm already also been thinking like after we do the premiere that eventually we'd hold a conference for voices like ours to just converge and just host all these different talks and have that conversation on a physical in-person level. And there's a lot that can be happening, but the fact that I even have to think about like people's safety in an environment like that, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
it's terrifying
Yep.
because of people's politics becoming like a
Yeah.
religion to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And it's
there's
like
there's
that's
so
not what's
much.
meant. Like that's not what's meant about be willing to die for it necessarily. Is that you need to be willing to go kill for it. It's be willing to die for it, not be willing to kill for it. Honestly,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so backwards. It's exactly. It was another thing that came to me. It was like it was. It felt like psychosis because it was just like crumbling all at once, but also so much was making sense. And like everything is backwards. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
that started the whole
It's
thing
the
of
up
like,
it's the upside down.
yes, yeah, you're
Yeah.
in the upside down, 100%.
It truly is. And then once you see it, it's like because that's exactly my experience. Everything feels like it's upside down and inverted and like it's so interesting how that works where it's like there's a truth that's given to you and yet it's inverted every time. And you have to learn how to I'm reminded my kids have this book called What's So Great About the Brain. And there's this little section where it talks about how your eyes perceive images. There's the eyeballs holding a picture of a cat that's upside down and backwards, and the brain has to flip it around because it's inverted. And that's almost kind of like our experience of reality is like we take in information and it's given to us upside down and backwards. And we have to do the inversion ourselves and learn how to do that because it's a skill. You
It
have to
really
figure
is a
out how to do
skill.
that. Yeah.
And I think people who start doing it might fool themselves into thinking, well, this is difficult. It doesn't come naturally to me. It must not be the right thing to do. And in fact, it's just a skill that's been dormant, like something they were always supposed to develop, but didn't because they were preparing for standardized tests instead. And you think you get out of school and you think you're educated, right? You think you're
Yeah.
educated because you got the degree, you got the student debt to prove it. I was lucky it didn't. I had scholarships, but I thought I had an education when I left college, and I did not. Everything I've learned about life and about the stuff that I share now was learned like in the school of hard knocks, just going out
Yeah.
there and doing my best, living and learning along the way, learning about myself, knowing that like, how would I live my life? What would I do differently if I didn't think on some level that I was a bad kid or deserved eternal conscious torment? Like, seeing how that's playing out in my life now, of like, I'm even afraid to talk to my dad openly about the fact that I'm making a film because he still very much identifies with Jesus died for me. How can you interpret I am the way, the truth, and the life in any other way besides, the body and the blood being covering you and your sins or whatever? Like,
Yeah.
there's no other meaning for that. I don't see how you could interpret it another way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I want him to be there. I want him to actually watch the film and then we'll talk about it, right? Like, because I'm not coming at these Christians. I'm not going to attack Christianity. It's not about fighting fire, trying to prove who's wrong. Like, you're wrong with this, and like the nitpickiness of like, well, the Bible says this too. It's like, there's no way I can have the conversation that starts with the premise that the Bible is God's word, because I just don't believe that. It makes
Yep.
no logical sense. And as long as they're starting from that level and they think they're proving me wrong by things that they quote from the Bible, I love to quote scripture back to them that proves them wrong in a way that they don't
Mm-hmm.
understand because they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to, I know they're on the journey, right? And I am communicating with a version of myself at some point. I was trying to argue with Catholics when I was
Yeah.
an evangelical. I was like, it
Yep.
says that you should
Yep.
call no man on earth father. Like, who's the Pope? Like, basically
Yeah.
poking holes
Yeah.
in the Catholic doctrine before I could poke holes in, the evangelical one, like I didn't
Yeah.
think I was in a cult. I went to a non-denominational church. How could that be
Yeah,
a
no, we're
cult? How could
fine.
that be?
Yeah. But
It's
it's
not
so
even a
interesting, like
denomination.
that experience that you had of like poking holes in Catholic theology. I've found that it's people like us who do that. Like when we were in evangelical America, poking holes in everything else, it is only a matter of time before we started poking holes in our own theology. And when you have that skill set, like it takes you places. And in this season of transition and change, and also coming home to myself, there is this mantra that I was given, not a mantra, but I'll take it as one, um, years ago, where we did an exercise called the gift that I see in you. And you went up to each person and you said like one word or phrase that was like, this is what I'm getting from you. This is what I see in you. And I was across from my friend and he looks me right in the eyes and he says, hopeful adventurer. And it just hit me so hard. I instantly teared up and I was like, whoa.
That's super
I
accurate. And
I
we're
had
not like the
never.
closest of friends, but I know enough about
Mhm.
you that that resonates 100%.
Yeah, dude, thank you. It I never felt more seen than in that moment. And I've realized in this season that I'm in now, I'm like, I'm an adventurer. And I can't stay put in one place. And sometimes that's physically, like during our marriage, we moved 7 times in like 10 years or whatever, and then moved to Nashville. And now I'm like, all right, I'm done with Nashville. I'm moving to somewhere else. And we were going to move internationally and all the crazy stuff. But even if it's not physically moving, I can't stay in one place, like belief wise.
Yeah.
Like I always have to keep moving. I always have to keep growing. And when you're in religion, as I was for so long, even up to a couple months ago, still saying like, "Oh no, I'm a Christian," but and now just be like,
It's
why am I
so
doing
fresh,
this?"
but like
You
because of
know?
how far you've grown emotionally before it all happens, like you were already
Yeah.
10 steps ahead. And it's refreshing to hear you speak about it so openly and like
Mm-hmm.
you have like a supercomputer processor going
Yeah.
through that based on your journey up to that point. It was like everything
Yeah.
was preparing you for this. And that's a
Yes.
beautiful thing.
Yes. And I realized something this morning because I think I'm on the cusp of relaunching like a coaching offer as I'm coming out of this and it being more focused on like, or being more inclusive, I should say, of the deconstruction conversation. And I was thinking about it today of like, what does that look like for me now? And I had this insight of, this wasn't available for me. I have a brand called the Recovering Christian Entrepreneur. I'm pretty sure that's my handle on TikTok, Recovering Christian Entrepreneur. I have a Substack. And I've been trying to get it going, but I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get it going while all
'Cause you're
this was
not
going
Christian
on.
anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And
They're no longer your target audience.
yeah, right. And that is where I always had that tension of like, I'm recovering from Christianity. And the person that is aimed towards is the person that I was, 1, 2, 3, 5 years ago. Um, and for marketing purposes, I love the name. And I was thinking about like now I'm in a place where I've always felt that I didn't really care what the other person believed. And I remember the conversation that we had where you were like, oh, I'm afraid of saying something wrong. I was like, oh, I don't care. But there were still things that triggered me, not with you per se, but like in general, like, oh well, that's the wrong thing. Like, and we gotta, you know, oh, I'm hearing somebody say the wrong thing. What am I gonna do?
Yeah,
And
like
now
not
I'm,
believing that Jesus was your savior,
yeah,
like that savior, like that is not an option. So there's no matter
exactly.
what's going on in your personal life as a human, we got to get to the core of the issue, which is you don't believe the right thing about Jesus. And
Yeah.
like that's
Yes.
not the issue at all,
Yes.
actually.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And I actually I lost a client once because when I first launched the Recovering Christian Entrepreneur, when I was like still pretty religious, though I didn't know it, I had a coaching conversation where she had hired me to help with her messaging, and I took the conversation into God territory instead. And she's like, "This is not what I signed up for. I think I'm out," and that shocked me, but it also caused me to step back from the whole thing. I just put it on ice for a few years, and now I look at it and I'm like, "Yeah, I really don't care what you believe. What I want to know is like, are you healthy? Like, do you feel good in your life? Are you pursuing the things you want to pursue? Because like what I believe God is and who I think God is now, drastically different today than it was a few years ago. But there's this one quote that I read from Richard Rohr who said, everybody who has ever sought out God has found a lover and not a tyrant. And that's what keeps me going, because I actually did a somewhat formal ritual with myself where I was like, I denounced Jesus and I pledged myself to the love he represents. And just kind of this like reconfiguration of like, I'm putting aside everything that I was taught and what I thought I believed, but there
Yeah.
is something real I discovered about it along the way. And I'm just going to remove the middleman. And just
Hmm.
like what I really truly want is to be someone who pursues love and mercy and justice and all of that in ways that are emotionally and spiritually healthy. And
Mm.
when you have a sensitivity to justice and you can look at something and you can look at your own actions and be like, wow, I became the kind of person who enabled abuse. Like, and that is not how I want to show up in the world. Then, and when you can be honest about that, that is really when things can actually begin to change, because you cannot ever reconcile for a harm that you won't admit that you've done. And that is the core. You have to reconcile the past before you can move on into the future, or it gets heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier until you can't move and you are forced to deal with it. And that's
Yeah.
always been my philosophy, and I don't need Christianity to wrap around that for me to know that
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah, and in a way, I think people are afraid of that. I think they're afraid of accountability because they will feel shame and they want to avoid shame. But with higher consciousness and with like true repentance, change of mind, change of heart, it's what metanoia, the Greek word, actually means, is literal transformation of yourself, of your what you believe to be true about yourself, and you act differently. Like the fruit is different because you are an expanded version of who you thought you were. And if people can
Mm-hmm.
see themselves that way and they can forgive themselves, somebody who has forgiven themselves, is a lot easier for others to forgive them because they are able to speak
Mm,
so candidly and compassionately about who they used to be and why they were the way they were and what actually changed, right? I think might be a kind of a version of what happens when people find Jesus, but they're kind of putting their guilt and shame onto someone else. Like, yes, I am
mm,
guilty. Yes, I am bad. But thank God for Jesus dying for my sins, that like that doesn't matter anymore. It's almost like you enter into this psychosis, this delusion of judgment of oneself. And that
mm-hmm,
judgment sticks with you, and you don't even realize that you're judging yourself this whole time, that you become trapped in that and you never let yourself be who you want to be and what the desires of your heart are telling you, pointing you towards. And the word desire actually means of the Father. They were given to us what we truly desire, the things that we want to pursue that light us up inside are our gifts. And if we don't pursue those things, we don't bring out the beauty and the creativity within us and create in the world and to do what we're meant to do as humans, then it will wither us away in more ways than just one. And I think we see the evidence of a lot of suppression spiritually and a lot of misalignment. And of course, the tools that are being used to further that, like the pharmaceutical drugs that actually disconnect us more from ourselves instead of getting to the root cause of why we're feeling disconnected in the first place. It's like all of these band-aid systems are just perpetuating the problem when the problem is the system. Like the problem, we're all believing in a pinhole-sized version of reality. It's just a little bit bigger pinhole than the one that maybe we were sold to as Christianity is the ultimate reality when it's not. It's just what people
yeah,
think about ultimate reality. It's like people's thoughts about God are in the Bible, not God's actual thoughts.
yeah. It's so true. Yeah. Well,
Well,
this has
as
been
we
a
wrap
great
up here,
conversation.
it's been an awesome conversation. We're definitely going to stay in touch. In fact, I'm going to get you the link to our community, Conscious Rebels Network, because I think there's some synergy there. And where can people find you who, in the meantime, I mean, other than Conscious Rebels Network, like you're on social
Mm-hmm.
media talking about this stuff, or you're starting to? I've seen your videos.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I would say the place where I'm really dedicating like the conversation to like deconstruction type of stuff is TikTok is the first one. So I'm at Cameron Snow, Cameron with a K, on TikTok. I do have a Substack, the Recovering Christian Entrepreneur, that is there's a couple posts that I have more plans for. And then I still do publish on my Facebook profile, which is just /Cameron.Snow. And we'll probably use that more as I go along too. But I'm at the like literally today, the thought of like it's time to like fully step into this thing.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we look forward to staying in touch with you, Cam, and thanks for being on Conscious Rebels podcast.
Thank you.